So yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As you've heard, I'm a PhD student with Leicester University, but I'm from Cornwall and in Cornwall at the moment. I live in Falmouth. I've been sort of working with Black Voices Cornwall now for almost since the start. So it's really lovely to be here this evening. And I'm going to kind of do a whistle-stop tour of my PhD thesis and the research that I've been doing. I think it's probably, oh no, I'll do that in a minute. I also, oh, hang on. Right. How am I going to, why won't it let me do slides? Oh, there we go. Okay. Right, we're in the right place. I was also going to do a content warning. I'm not going to use archaic racial or racist language in this presentation, but some does feature on the slides because it is a feature of archival documents. So please do prepare yourself for that. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of my thesis and the research that I've been doing. Yeah, as Abby said, my PhD thesis covers from about 1560 to 1900. Oh, kind of more like 1920. And it looks at Black histories of Cornwall. And my definition of Black very quickly is people of African or African Caribbean heritage. I'm not using it in a kind of political Blackness sense to include Asian people of Asian heritage and from elsewhere. I could do a whole presentation on that, but for now, let's just keep that tight. I have researched about 300 individuals, and there are many more likely hidden in the archives or in an archive, because the archives were not designed to record race or skin color. Some of you may know that it wasn't included in the census until 1991. So it's really, you're dealing with an archive that just didn't have the capability of recording this information. So you can see that the people I've found were located all across Cornwall. What you can't see from this sort of screenshot is the dominance of Falmouth and just how many people from my collection of 300 that were living in Falmouth or were surfacing or appearing in the archive in Falmouth. So it was a huge percentage, which I don't have to hand, but probably about half. Yeah, so 85% of the people I've researched are male, and a lot of them are sailors, which obviously also explains the Falmouth connection as well. And I've used a huge variety of archival sources, both in Cornwall, but also lots of them in London in particular, and archives across Britain, which kind of shows how embedded Black history is in British history, as well as Cornish history. Might be worth noting that when I originally started this, I was going to do a comparative project between Cornwall and Wales, and I ended up finding so much for Cornwall that there's been no need to do the comparison. So that's sort of for someone else to do, project for the future. Right, powering on through. Oh, these slides are really slow. There we go. So my earliest references, the earliest reference I found dates from 1560, and it's to a black pirate who was arrested from being on a Portuguese ship that was heading to Brazil carrying sugar. So it gives you an idea already of these themes of transatlantic potentially slavery at that point, or certainly transatlantic trade, Brazil and sugar, which all come into play later. Most of the earliest references are scattered baptisms and burials, and some scholars have suggested that this meant that the Black individuals in them had led lonely and miserable lives. I would kind of contest that in that the entries just don't tell us anything. We can't know, and it seems a shame to judge someone's entire life by 4 words on a page. And also the fact that they were baptized in the church and buried in the churchyard does suggest inclusion in the local community, although it is unclear how they came to be in Britain or in Cornwall. By the end of the 17th century, the slavery link is more established, and we do see increased numbers from that time. Some of you will know about the Corker brothers who traded and enslaved people from Falmouth, and there are other connections as well. He's not the only instance. One of the key ways that people came to Cornwall is as servants. So often those were of people with colonial connections. A good example of that is John Angola, who was a servant at St. Michael's Mount. And we know about him because this newspaper advert appeared about him in 1674. as he had run away. And obviously, if we know the geography of St. Michael's Mount, how he ran away is, poses lots of questions. Did he sail? I would have thought that was more likely, given that it was easier to remain hidden. Did he have accomplices or friends? Perhaps he did run across the causeway at low tide. It really does make you think. And the newspaper article has quite a lot of detail in it that gives us clues about his background. Certainly his surname, Angola, links likely to the part of Africa from whence he originated. And the fact that in the description it describes how he was branded. So it says he's iron marked in his breast with the sign of a greyhound and a sign of a hawk, which has clear links to plantation slavery. His clothing sounds quite grand. He's got purple coat and breeches, and a beaver hat, but it does describe that it's very old and very worn. So it suggests that the St. Aubyn family for whom he was working or enslaved didn't invest much money in him. And the suspicion from the abbot seems to be that he had ended up in London. Because if you've seen him, you were told to report it to another St. Aubyn, who's probably the brother of the one who was living at the Mount in London. So yeah, it's a really clear example by the end of the 17th century of how enslavement was becoming quite relevant. But servants were found in all sorts of households, not just in sort of big well-known ones. One of the stories that I found most fascinating was the burial of Parthenia Christmas, and that very grand name is quite typical of enslaved people. And she's a rare woman in my study as well. It describes how she lived with Mr. Brooks. Now, Mr. Brooks was Job Brooks, who was the vicar of Landulph parish church up near Plymouth, but in Cornwall. And obviously that's all her record says, so it's quite hard to know more about her. However, I did manage to find a letter at the National Archives that described how Mr. Brooks had been to Barbados with Colonel Drax in the late 17th century, in the 1600s. And some of you will know the Drax family. They still own sugar plantations today, and until recently, one of them was a Conservative MP. So there's quite an instant link that if Job Brooks went to Barbados with the Drax family, who owned enslaved people, and they were sort of pioneers in a way of slavery in Barbados, it provides quite a clear link to how Parthenia might have encountered Mr. Brooks. And he also had a wife born in Barbados, who I think is probably white. So Parthenia may have belonged to her, or grown up with her as well. Now, there's research notes about the church from about the 1950s that describe Job Brooks's grave and how buried within it is a black servant, as well as the rest of the family members. And I think this is his grave, but you can see that another 75 years of drizzle has eroded any reference to that. So if those research notes didn't exist, we would have no clue for that. But it does suggest that perhaps she was a valued member of the family, even though potentially had no choice in the matter of coming to Cornwall. So many of the people who I found are sailors, as I mentioned before, and it's kind of obvious, given Cornwall's maritime heritage and landscape and geography, that sailors would be or by sea would be a way that people would arrive. Often they appear like this in the baptism registers, so there'll be a racial descriptor and then their age, and it's unusual because they're baptized as adults, whereas most people were baptized as babies. So this is kind of a typical example from Falmouth in the late 1700s. And in a couple of years in Falmouth at this time, I found 3% of people baptized at Falmouth Parish Church were black, which seems quite high, really. It's probably higher than it would be today, I would think. And it's likely connected to events in America at the time during the American War of Independence, when enslaved people were promised their freedom if they, excuse me, if they came, if they joined the British side. So that these people may have been enslaved, they may have come to Britain as a result of that kind of pact. And there's a suggestion, or lots of suggestions in the scholarship, that they got themselves baptized because it was a way of escaping enslavement, although this wasn't technically true. Christian people could definitely be enslaved, but there was a common belief that they couldn't be. So yeah, that's for I found about 122 sailors, or people who I think were sailors. Obviously, it doesn't say that they were sailors, so I'm using the term quite loosely, but it seems quite likely that they have turned up in port and arrived by sea. Yes, I'm just finding my place. So some of these, you can see their names are really common, which makes them harder to trace in the archival sources. And many of them potentially had quite a fleeting or transient presence. They may have gone back to sea. People also change their names, you know, to avoid detection, to kind of keep away from authorities. So for many of them, it's hard to know what happened next. But for one, Juba Hope, he didn't arrive at this time, he arrived later, but he settled in Cornwall. And he was baptized in 1818 in St. Stephen's near Saltash. Um, and he was aged about 18. It later suggests that he was from Sierra Leone. And it says he's a servant, but I think he was probably a servant aboard a vessel because he spends the rest of his life at sea. 10 years later, he married in Falmouth, which suggests that he spent time around the coast of Cornwall. And obviously, the name Juba Hope is more unusual, so it makes it easier to trace him. You can see down the bottom here where it says this marriage was solemnized between us, and that Juba could actually write his name, which suggests he may have had some form of education or, was taught penmanship, whereas his wife, who was a local woman, Grace Bolitho, has just done a mark. And Juba actually worked for the Falmouth Packet Service. He worked there for a number of years and across a number of vessels. And at this time, it was sort of steady, reliable, good work, like respectable, good for settling down, having a family, and all of that. And because, oh, sorry, that's his signature, zoomed in a bit closer. Because at that time, the packet service, so we're now in about the 1830s, the packet service was run by the Navy, by the Admiralty. There are really extensive archives in London. They're also absolutely filthy. I can never get over how dirty they are, hence the picture of my filthy hand. It takes days to get it off. But it means you can trace his service through the record quite effectively, going back and forth through time, which means you can see the number of vessels he worked on. And he would have spent like hundreds of days at sea, traveled thousands of miles on the packet ship routes, particularly to the Caribbean, South America, and North America, which would all have been quite risky at the time, given he was a black man and slavery was still legal there. There was always a risk of capture. Now, sadly, like many of the sailors in my study, Juba did not live a long life, and he actually died at sea, age 32, 800 miles from Barbados, and the exact location is recorded in the ship's log. I don't know if you can read the handwriting there, but it's from the master of the ship, or the captain, who describes his death and then burial overboard the next day. Interestingly, the Barbadian newspaper actually reports on the arrival of the ship too, and notes that somebody has died of smallpox. And I think that is probably Juba, because there's only about 30 people aboard the vessel, and there didn't seem to be anyone else who died aboard. So yeah, quite a sad end. And his two children that he had with his wife both died before the age of about 4, and his wife also died a few years later. So suggests sort of lots of poverty and ill health in the family, which was not atypical at the time. So later on in the century, the case of Edward Campbell provides a sort of different set of sources, but it's one of the ones that's fascinated me, because it can be really hard, because as I mentioned at the beginning, the archival sources were not set up to record race or skin color. It can be really hard actually to work out if people were black or not. And this means that the archive kind of reads white, particularly for white historians who have been in the British education system and told there's no black history. So it can be quite hard to challenge that. You really have to go looking for it. So I found Edward Campbell, and he was born in Barbados, on a merchant shipping crew list at Crescent-Kerno. And he, I've completely blanked about what I was going to say. So yeah, but because he was born in Barbados, I kind of just tried to research him further. But the Merchant Navy records are nowhere near as consistent as the Royal Navy or Admiralty records. So lots of them are kept in different places, including a huge amount in Nova Scotia, which isn't very helpful. However, I did manage to track him across a number of crew lists, but also in Cornish sort of sources as well. So, for example, he's in the census. This is all the censuses displayed below here, as well as some further crew lists. But obviously none of them mention whether he was a black man or not, which was quite frustrating because I traced him for 30 years and he lived in St Austell. He married and had 2 children and appears to have had a very stable life, really. However, in 1908, or I found a newspaper article from 1908, which kind of gave me the answers I was looking for, and also poses quite a lot of sort of questions about Cornwall in the past. So as was typical, Campbell is sort of racially labelled in the newspaper, which at least gave me proof that he was a black man and I hadn't sort of just been researching a random white sailor. But it also shows, so he was arrested for assault, but he was provoked by his neighbours who were openly racist and called him and his wife names. And in longer versions of the article, it sort of says, well, they just didn't like black people. So it kind of shows that it provides a kind of counter weight to the idea that just because he could marry and have children and work, that his life was easy and there was no racial antipathy towards him, which is the kind of thing you sometimes get in the historical scholarship. They say, well, there can't have been any racism because he could do this. And it sort of shows how this stuff can simmer under the surface and not be recorded in the archive until it erupts. And in this case, he lost his temper. Interestingly, though, the court was actually quite sympathetic and gave him a lenient sentence, agreeing he'd been provoked. So it does also suggest that the kind of criminal justice system wasn't particularly kind of prejudiced against him, and did sort of see that he had received provocation, although obviously his neighbours were not persecuted or prosecuted for the provocation. So there we go. But it kind of shows the challenges and the level of research sometimes required just to get an identification. And also this only happens because of this event. Had Edward Campbell not stabbed his neighbour, we still wouldn't know probably anything more about him. Despite the conviction, he went back to sea. It was the First World War and they were dying for labour, manpower in the navy or merchant navy, and sadly his vessel was torpedoed and he was lost at sea in 1917. But he is actually remembered on the Merchant Seafarers War Memorial in London on Tower Hill. I don't think he's on any ones in St Austell though. Okay, powering on through because I am conscious of the time. So it wasn't just sailors that I've researched, and it wasn't just people who kind of moved over to Cornwall. It was also people who were born here, people of colour who were born here. So I found miners, carpenters, and all sorts of labourers. The numbers are pretty small, but still they provide insight into a population of colour that is sort of otherwise hidden, and the main source for these was the jail registers. And again, we have to be very wary of the lens of criminality because this is again just one event in one person's life, and of 30,000 jail register entries, I've only found about 50 that relate to people who I would think are black or were black. So it's a tiny number, and I don't want to view them through the lens of just of criminality. However, because the registers included physical descriptions, it does mean that you can identify people in an archive, as I've said, that isn't set up for that. So John Williams was either a miner or a labourer. He was poor, he lived in the workhouse, and he was young, he was only a teenager. But he's variously described in different ways that suggest he was of mixed heritage. But he was born in Cornwall. But because of his common name, it's really hard to trace who his parents were to understand, who they may have been and where they may have been from as well. But he was charged with numerous crimes, three crimes within a year, all petty, so sort of theft, it's a riot that wasn't really a riot, and just sort of symptomatic of a hard, poor life, like a lot of people in Cornwall at this time. But after his third imprisonment, he was actually sentenced to be transported, and he was transported to Tasmania. So even though he was imprisoned in 1847, the vessel didn't actually leave until 1850. So he spent 3 years waiting to be transported. and he arrived in Tasmania. And you can trace these records. The Australian convict records are all available online, and they're kind of amazing. And the consistent physical description helps trace him, as well as knowing who he was and the crimes that he was accused of. And it's possible to trace him till the end of his sentence in Tasmania in 1854, but not beyond that point, largely because his name is so common. But I mean, it may well be possible in future or with more sources, but that the name John Williams doesn't really help a researcher. Um, but they just give you these sort of snippets of individuals, just help build up a picture of kind of a black and mixed heritage working class in Cornwall, and kind of challenge the views that everybody in the past was white. So I'm not going to talk about Joseph Emedy today because I'm assuming that most people have a bit of an idea about him, and if you don't, you can ask me in a minute. But I want to actually talk about his descendants. I mean, I think Emedy is kind of an exception to the kind of hidden Black history rule in Cornwall, and that he has received a fair amount of attention, although it's still relative, and I still wouldn't assume that everybody knows who he was. But I've been looking into the lives of his son and grandson, who stayed living in Cornwall, but kind of lived a less celebrated, perhaps more ordinary life than you might expect of a sort of working class person of mixed heritage in the 19th century. So his son Thomas was involved. He was also a musician, and he, for example, led the band at Helston Flora Day, and also when the Queen and Prince Albert visited Foy in 1846. It was Joseph Emedy's son, I think, and grandson who led the band there, showing they had quite an esteemed role. But they couldn't make a living full time out of music, and the son Thomas worked as a carpenter, but lived a long life in Cornwall, had many children, and it was reported in the newspapers that 3,000 people attended his funeral, which seems kind of extraordinary. His son Richard seems to have had a harder life again, and interestingly is still racially identified, despite in theory being kind of third generation. Um, and he is accused of neglecting his children. He was widowed with 3 or 4 daughters, and I think life was probably very hard. They were very poor, and he was trying to make a living as a musician again. Interestingly, he was imprisoned for neglect, but this letter appeared in the paper defending him and sort of saying, well, what's the point in that? He's trying to do his best. But later he actually joins blackface minstrel troops, so you may be familiar with them. They tend to be pretty racist and offensive, but conversely also provided work for kind of performers of colour at this time. It kind of shows the complexities we're dealing with. But he moved to America, and in a way, as did the rest of his family, they became part of the Cornish diaspora, and their descendants recall them baking pasties and talking about fishing and mining and things. So they put a new sort of spin on the typical version of the Cornish diaspora, which is kind of just white miners. I'm really conscious of the time, but actually I'm getting there. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 of the women that I found, just because otherwise it's completely dominated by men. So as I mentioned, 85% of the people I've discovered are men. However, there were several women, about 30 in the study, probably maybe more than that. But I wanted to talk about 2 of them. They both lived around the Falmouth Penryn area, and their long lives span nearly 150 years of Cornish history, which seems kind of extraordinary. So Maria appears in the baptism register age 9 in 1769, and I think we can speculate that her appearance in Cornwall was probably connected to slavery. She may have survived the Middle Passage, and she may also have been connected to a packet captain whose surname was Edwards. And I do sort of speculate that some of the people who were baptised in Cornwall may have arrived with the packet captains, because some of them have matching surnames, and some of those surnames are more distinctive than Edwards. So Maria, we don't really know anything about her, but she stays in the Penryn area. So she was baptized in St. Gluvius. And she actually marries 3 times in St. Gluvius, all to black husbands, probably all sailors from the records of their baptisms. Which is kind of fascinating, and suggests sort of access perhaps to a community, or that she well, that I can't believe she married every black person who turned up in Penryn. So kind of suggests there may have been numbers who didn't get baptized and didn't get married, and thus were not recorded in the archival record as well. The fact that between some of the sailors' baptisms and marriage to her as well was about 10 years suggests they were living and working around the coast. Now, Maria had at least 7 children, but only one survived, and her daughter Charlotte would also have been a black woman and lived in Penryn for a long time, had children there as well, and worked as a staymaker, so making corsets. So it was like a skilled trade, and it shows that she was sort of respected in the town, and could make a living, and with a skilled trade, like I say. Now, Maria lived to be 92, thereabouts, and she's buried in St. Gluvius, as are the rest of her family members. So it kind of makes this church. Oh, sorry. There's her marriages. Um, Kind of makes this church quite a key site in the history of the Black presence or Black history of Cornwall, I think. So I'm conscious that I am going a little bit over time, but I will, as long as it's all right, I'm just going to plow on a little bit quicker. So last woman I wanted to talk about is Dionysia Geach. Now she also appears in the records for the first time age 9 as the adopted daughter of William and Margaret Geach, living out at Lamamva, which is a tiny hamlet kind of just outside of Falmouth near Constantine. It becomes apparent from William Geach's will that he met Dionysia in Brazil, and he likely went to Brazil connected to the mining industry, and he brought her back from Brazil. She potentially was enslaved. Slavery was still legal in Brazil well into the 1880s. The questions of how he came to acquire Dionysia are uncertain, but he brought her back from Brazil. And it records that she's his adopted daughter, although this doesn't kind of stay, this isn't a consistent record. And he leaves her £10 in his will, which is about £600 a day, and is the same as what he left his brother, which does suggest a kind of close family connection. Now, at the time of his death and later his wife Margaret's, the family were actually living on Killigrew Street, but they still owned property in Lamanva. And after William and Margaret died, Dionysia seemed to struggle to support herself. Initially, she seemed to be okay, but by 1894, she was looking for poor relief. And this is again the only proof I had that she was a woman of colour until later, because I wasn't sure. So I had her on a list, but I just had no way of knowing until I came across this reference. And once again, it's the newspaper that kind of gratuitously, but also usefully, provides that information. Now you can see from this entry that the Guardians refused her poor relief, which was quite common at the time, but people are speculating that it's because she's a black woman, and they say this is ridiculous and all the rest of it. But it just goes to show that even in the 1890s, people were sensitive in Falmouth to racial discrimination, and they felt that that would be a feasible thing to accuse someone of. But whether it was the case or not is a little bit harder to determine. She did receive some relief, which was unusual at the time. For various reasons, and has managed to did seem to support herself for the rest of her life, working as a dressmaker, living out at Lamamva actually, which seems extraordinary, because it's such a tiny hamlet, that she lived there for probably 20 to 30 years, and like I say, worked as a dressmaker. And she died in 1923. And at her burial in Budok churchyard, the vicar couldn't resist writing that she was a femina nigra, which means a black woman in Latin. So she's kind of racialized even in death and even after kind of 50, 60 years living in the local area. But I like to think I can't find her grave in Budok, which is just like 5 minutes walk from my house. But I like to think that she's sort of buried looking out at the Atlantic and sort of, I guess, back over to Brazil. So there we go. I'm sorry for going over a little bit. It was a very whistle-stop tour. I realised when I was writing this that I could probably talk for about 5 hours, which nobody needs. There's so many more stories and lives to share. It's really been an extraordinary privilege to do the research, and to kind of uncover these extraordinary stories. I mean, I think at the very least, this proves that Black people have been living, working, and contributing in Cornwall for really for centuries. Marrying, having children, and living kind of normal lives. It kind of also shows how integrated this history is into British history, and Cornish history more generally. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Chloe.
A bit
That
of
was
a
really
speed.
insightful. And I also appreciate not kind of going so deep into Joseph Emedy because it feels like a lot of people just know him and just actually giving space to more people that we may never have heard of. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm now opening it out to the floor, or the virtual floor, should I say. Any questions, comments, thoughts, feelings are really welcome. So either wave at me or put your virtual hand up or just jump in and chat to us. But I'll leave it to you. Yeah. Oh, Helen's first, so you go for it, Helen.
Oh, ask somebody else if that's fine.
Okay, we'll go to Maria then.
Hi, nice to see you, Abby, and see you again, Chloe. Well, we were just saying, Chris and I were just saying that our appetite's been whetted for this, really, and that we'd really appreciate lots more of this sort of information. So we wonder if that's something that could happen at some point.
Yes, in short. So like at the moment my priority is just finishing this blooming thesis. But absolutely I'm really keen to explore ways, and I've chatted to Abby and Helen at BBC as well about just ways that we can get this history out there. So I mean, obviously it will be in the thesis, but they tend to be pretty impenetrable and not an enjoyable read. So I'm really keen to make the information accessible in as wider formats as possible, not just through talks, but it would be great to get some of it into sort of museums and galleries and websites and all the rest of it. So one of the things I've also written with the thesis, which is a little bit unnecessary, is full biographies of most of the people I've been able to research. So that's a bit more accessible, and I'm hoping they could be used as sort of creative inspiration as well. There's some really amazing stories, and probably ultimately I would like to write this into a book that's more accessible, and hopefully there would be a market for it. So that's all to explore. But absolutely, I didn't want to do all this work for no one to know about it.
That would be wonderful. I'm thinking about things like tours, you know, great visiting graveyards and things like that, which would open this history to lots of people who like walking and who love history, that kind of thing. So
You sound like you're volunteering, Maria.
well, yeah, I'm up for it.
Great. No, I'd love to do all of that sort of, particularly around the Falmouth area. You could have a really rich tour. I think going up to Landulph or something might be a bit of a trek for sort of one one story. But I definitely think there's room for, well, just to explore all sorts of avenues for this, because I mean I grew up in Falmouth, I went to school in Falmouth, went, did all the rest of it in Falmouth, and it's changed my view of Falmouth in the past, and I really just think it's kind of vital for everyone, really.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and also Maria, kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but Helen has created something similar to a map of different spots. So maybe also with Chloe's research, that could also be spots could be added to that live map, and then just like really grow that out as a resource. But I'll leave Helen to tell more about that in your talk. So yeah, Kate, you've got your hand up.
Yes. I live in Falmouth, as you know, Chloe. And you say when you're walking around Falmouth that you're aware of all the people that have been here. There's one thing that I noticed in Cornwall is that most places you go, you get a local history museum. And one thing that Falmouth hasn't got is a local history museum. So these stories aren't being told. So that's just a heads up, and I will kind of ask in the council why we haven't got one and try and push that, because these stories need to be told.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And obviously anything we can do to help to push that as well be really important. And as we always say, that British history is Black history too, or I don't know if it's the other way around, but you know what I mean anyway. So yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Please feel free. No silly questions are here, so open form. Helen, and then Andrew, and then Joe. All come at once.
Yeah, like buses.
I can wait. I can wait.
Chloe, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, your work has just been absolutely incredible. I would love it if we managed to get some funding to turn these into stories for children in schools, which we've talked about. But if you were to sum up one key thing, your one takeaway, what would be your main one? That might be a hard question to answer, but what would be your main learning, your main whatever?
I think, can I do two?
I'll let you.
Thanks. I think one is just how Cornwall looks different in the past from how I perceived it. Like, and I think probably my perception was based on just not thinking about it. So I think it's that there's just this proof that Cornwall, in fact I might do three. Cornwall looked different in the past. Archive sources are not designed to record this information, which really serves people who want to deny it, because it's hard to find. And so kind of the building blocks on which we build our history are flawed, and Britain as a whole kind of needs to think about that. And then the third one, I think, as well, is how Cornwall is way more involved in colonialism and slavery and all of this stuff than is apparent in any kind of current like canon of work. So they're my three, and in fact they're the kind of conclusions to the thesis. Thanks, Helen. So yeah, so it's the sheer variety and diversity of Black life in Cornwall in the past, but also what that says about Cornwall and the archives as well.
Summed up really well. I love
Thanks.
that.
Been practicing.
Andrew, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely fascinating so far. Now, I might have dreamt this, but I'm sure I saw a news report, local Southwest news, talking about you know, the work that you've done, Chloe. Did I dream that, or did I see it online or on social media? I'm sure I saw something on the local news, and I just wondered. Well, I guess my question was, there's obviously a lot of information out there with the wider community, and I just wondered at any point whether that has prompted people to share family stories or information that they may have. And I guess archives is one way of finding out that information. But also someone made a reference to Falmouth not having a museum. Well, they have a maritime museum, don't they? And given the fact some of the things you've been talking about links in quite nicely with maritime history, I just wonder whether there are any references there.
So firstly, I'm not sure about the news article unless it was the film, Abby, that I don't know.
Yeah.
The second one, so in terms of my focus, I've kind of covered like over 400 years as it is, so I deliberately stop in the early 20th century, which has in a way kind of limited some of the family stories. I haven't really gone looking for that, but there's absolutely a whole piece of work that would be done more in like living memory kind of, or like ancestral histories from the present day going back. But I have kind of steered clear of like oral histories and that, not for any like judgment of its value, but just because I can only do so much in a few years. And I also kind of had a position of myself as a white person and what was more or less appropriate for me to research. So that's why I haven't really gone down that route. But I am kind of interested in that some of the research that I have found will absolutely connect to people who probably still live in Cornwall today and potentially may not know that they have kind of Black ancestry as well. And the third thing is I have been working with the Maritime Museum. So the heritage sector is kind of struggles, as we all know, for funding and stuff, but I am in kind of very active conversations with them, and hopefully going forward we can definitely incorporate some of this history into the museum, and they're very keen for that as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. Going to move on to Joe and then Bryony, and then we're going to go with Helen's talk. So Joe, take it away.
Hi, Chloe. Thanks so much for that talk. It was so interesting. Really, really interesting. I was just thinking as well with all the decolonisation things, is there ways that you can share your stories from the UK and feed into this movement to share the archive stories and resources with African communities, African diasporas? So it's a wider sort of audience that we can try and feed into as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. It's not an avenue I've explored yet, particularly if it involves me going somewhere. That would be nice. But yeah, I think there's quite a, providing all this kind of work continues, there's a real exciting opportunities, I think, with what's happening in the Caribbean and what's happening in Africa, and what's sort of opening up around these stories and sharing them more widely.
Yeah, especially I think because mobile phones are amazing, aren't they now? Everything can get stored on it, so accessible, and it's been really interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that. And thank you for your question.
Thanks for that, Joe. That I want to like jump on a trip as well if you're going, Chloe. Just
I feel
for
like you'd
research
have
purposes.
to. Like it would be me. Like it would have
And
to be a
Maria,
joint
yeah,
thing.
we'll all jump on.
Yeah.
Bryony, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. It was lovely to hear your talk and see some of your PhD journey there. Really fabulous work. Yeah, listening to you, lots of things popped into my head. Just on a personal note, my kids used to go to Marlborough School, and they have packet ships, and they could really do with hearing some of those stories and having that integrated into their school knowledge. I was wondering, my questions are, one is about, you noticed that those markers weren't recorded in the archives. Are they now? Is there something to inform archiving practice? And is there any resistance, I know, given the politics of today, for people to self-identify in different ways, given the rise of the far right and these challenges around how people get recorded in archives? That was my one question. And then the second question is more of a statement, just thinking, I'd love to talk to you about options for follow-on funding. I think you should be thinking about that soon.
Thank you, Bryony. It's really nice to see you. So Bryony's in Canada. Haven't seen her for a few years. In terms of the markers in the archive, so I think that so obviously what's in the record is in the record, but I think different archive services have taken different approaches to that. So for example, when I was at Cres-en-Cournot, we tagged everything we found just with Black history, so it was a way of, so you didn't have to search the archive catalogue for like a racist term. You could, I mean, Black history, that's got its own problems as a term, but at least it was more neutral than having to search a racist term. I, funnily enough, was researching someone recently who I found ended up in the asylum in Derby, and I was in touch with the archivist there, and they said, "Oh, we're very keen whenever we identify a person of colour to write up their story and add it and make it really findable in our catalogue. So can you provide information?" So I wrote a biography for them basically, and they've now got it on their catalogue. But at the moment, it's very much individual archives making that choice to make that material more findable. And actually, with Abby, we were at the National Archives back in September doing a talk, and it was one of the things we talked to their staff about, because there isn't sort of any set policy or training or guidelines or anything coming from them, but you could almost see the penny dropping with them, where they knew of sources and that wouldn't be findable because you'd have to search for the right terms. So does that answer the question? I mean, I think in terms of people today and identification, it's kind of a whole different challenge, really. And yes, please do talk about funding for my postdoc.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of fellowships you should have a look at, HRC and UKRI, but we can talk offline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks for clearing that up, that Bryony's in Canada, because I was thinking it looks like it's bright outside and I'm sure it's pitch black over here. So thanks, just for
Just had my
curiosity
lunch.
purposes.
Yeah.
Right, so now we are going to move on to Helen's talk. And I'm also going to read Helen's bio too, just so everybody has a bit of background. So here we go. Helen is a poet of Sierra Leone and Irish heritage who was born in London and who has lived in Cornwall for 25 years. She loves poetry, reading, writing, and listening to it being performed, theatre, researching Black history, looking at objects related to Black history, and swimming in the sea. Her PhD is focused on slave narratives published in Britain during the c. 18th and was published as Romanticism and Slave Narratives, Cup 2000. Her first volume of poems, 1562, or in brackets 2022, voices the fictional lives of 6 Black women from 6 ports, c. 16th Britain. In 2022, her semi-autobiographical poetic play, Slave, was showcased at the Theatre Royal, Plymouth, and in 2024, her play Maeve and the 3,000 Black GIs was showcased at the Phoenix Theatre in Exeter by Beyond Face Theatre Company. So Helen is currently completing a second collection of poems and is also looking for a publisher and a play about Black British identity. Helen is also a founder of Word Kitchen and Cornwall and Devon Creative Collection, CIC, and she also has 4 wonderful children. So now I'm going to hand over to Helen. And would you like the map first, or do you want me to do the slides first?
Thank you, AB. So I do apologise. For some reason, I can't get my PowerPoint to share. I'll try one more time, but no, it's just not showing on the as an option. So I think if we could move between, maybe if we could start with the PowerPoint. So I'll be reading your PowerPoint screen, which is yeah. So thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. The next slide, please. So this is to say a little bit about Cornwall and Devon Creative Collective, CIC. So we were founded last year, and we are 4 people, volunteers, Daryl, Lainey, Rudolph, and myself, and we call ourselves Codec for short. The idea is to think about Cornwall and Devon. We're passionate about facilitating creative events and workshops. We're really keen to support artists and absolutely thrilled to be based in the Southwest. Next slide, please. So today I thought I would try and talk about 3 different areas. So in terms of Cornwall's untold stories about the Black presence and its legacy, I just want to introduce the map and also to, so that's the first part, then the second part to think about some 17th and 18th century writers in particular, and thirdly how I've responded to the archives, to the records or tried to respond to some of the records in a creative way. AB introduced me as a poet. I used to be an academic, but over lockdown, I still research, but I tend to, I feel that I'm living the creative side of myself more and more. But the research still happens. I'm still in love with research. Thank you. Could you send the next slide on, please? Okay, so this is an introduction to the Black History Map Cornwall. and that's the link. So I think at this point I think I can share. Can I share when you're sharing, or do you need to unshare?
I'll just unshare quickly.
All right, thank you. So can everyone see this now?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can't see what's being shown. So this is what is called the Plymouth Freedom Map, which was the first version of the mapping, if you like. So this was launched, I think, when was it? Oh, it's like 3 months ago. And this was a way of like, you know, experimenting with Google mapping. And I thought that it'd be a good idea to divide up. Can you see? So we've got items from the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, and that they are color coded, which hopefully makes it a little bit easier. So I know I'm supposed to be talking about Cornwall, but this is the sort of the, you know, the first version, and I feel like I should just mention St Andrew's Church, which there's a book that was published in 2008 by Imtiaz Habib called Black Lives in the Archive. And it was that book that I looked at. I think I found it maybe 3 years after it was published. And as a historian, so I'm not a historian, and I love people like Chloe who do actually do all the hard, dirty work. I just read the books and the websites. But lots of there's a lot of burials around St Andrew's Church in Plymouth. So this gives you a sense of some of the early archiving, and I also included Hawkins as a slave trader, and also probably people know about John Blank and his presence in the archive, because they arrived in Plymouth. So now I'm just going to go to, has that come to the Cornwall map now? Are you seeing Cornwall map?
No, it's still on the same Plymouth one.
Oh, okay. So I have to stop sharing. I see. Yeah, okay. I'm with you. Okay, so hopefully you've got the Cornwall map now, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so this is not as fully developed really as the Plymouth one. Obviously Plymouth's a city and Cornwall's huge. This is divided up slightly differently. So trying to plot African slaves arriving in Cornwall as the first layer. Then shipwrecks, which I've only just touched the surface of this, and they are actually more easy to locate. And then slave owners from Cornwall. And I was just starting to put fiction that references slavery, and I don't know why, but the text hasn't come out there. But there's an interesting text called Millennium Hall, which is set in Cornwall. I think the date was 1762. So it has a slightly different aspect to the Plymouth one. So that really the map is with you. If you have the link, you can open it. I can give access to people to so that they can be editors and adding to it, or I can make it public. So I haven't done either of the latter two yet, because well, it'd be good to have a conversation about it. Obviously, there's issues about policing a site if people put, you know, racist things on it. But actually, I think it's also nice to have, you know, the opportunity that people feel that they can contribute. So I'm just going to point out a few, just probably names that people know about, and maybe some they don't. So it's in historical order, and we have the first grave of Scipio from 1700. So if there's a photo or an image, I put it in, but I've tried to be a bit careful about copyright. And then a little summary. So Scipio, this is from 1700, a slave. The terminology servant was often used at this time, but slavery wasn't abolished until 133 years later. So this was a euphemism, really. I would say if you see the word servant before 1838, it has to be read as slave, even though the Somerset case of 1766, you know, put a little bit of question mark about there are no Britons no slaves in Britain. But anyway, Scipio was a servant of the Duke of Wharton, and he came from Cornwall came to Cornwall from St Helena. St Helena is interesting because it was one of the exclusions of the Anti-Slavery Act. So slavery continued there. So that's one example. I'm just going to sort of just a little, you know, set of samples. 1748, we've got Thomas Caesar, who's buried at St Andrew's Church in Cowstock, and we have the words baptised. Thomas Caesar, son of Mary Crocker, a base child by Mrs Elizabeth Foots Black, called Caesar. So two people there really mentioned. We've actually got a date of the baptism. If we move to, I'm just trying to choose people. Rachel Chapman, baptised in Foy, 1746. My absolute favourite. So this is someone whose work I studied. Let's see if I can. Olaudah Equiano, also known as Gustavus Vassa, who arrived in Falmouth. And so if you can scroll down again, he has an interesting history because we have his narrative, and I'll talk a little bit more about it a bit later on. And maybe John Alice, who's somebody I didn't know about, and here I do a shout out to Cresno Kerno as an amazing source of material, and also UCL's studies of the legacies of British slavery, which gives accounts of people in the UK who benefited from when slavery was abolished. They were compensated, so we can trace back to slave owners who have a Cornish link. So John Alice, escaped slave and a put swimmer and hero. He arrived in Falmouth on a coffee ship after escaping for slavery from Brazil. And as Chloe mentioned, I think often the names are signals of the master or the ship. So here, this, you know, the fact that it was the name of, often like Phyllis Wheatley, the poet, Phyllis was the name of her, of the ship she was on, and Wheatley was the master. But here, John Alice, John was the name of the captain and Alice is the name of the ship. So if I move away from that, just started to plot shipwrecks. So this is it's a shipwreck and a burial ground of slaves who perished on a slave ship belonging to the Royal African Company in the 1680s. So it's about 40 miles south of Land's End, and just starting to plot slave owners who were either living or resident in Cornwall. If I just jump to number 2 of this, so this has been quite a recent discovery for me. Humphrey Morris, who was the governor of the Bank of England, he was a slave trader. That's not new, but what's been more recent for me is to find out that he was brought up at Warrington Manor, which is in Launceston, with his cousin. So he's brought up as a young boy for I think it's about 10 years. And his house and the land around it was purchased from Sir Francis Drake's nephew. Morris was responsible for transporting over 30,000 individuals to Jamaica, Barbados, and Virginia and elsewhere in America between 1704 and 1732. He was also a crook. He defrauded the Bank of England by about 29,000. You usually add 2 noughts to work out how much that is. So it's over 2 million, or it can, people say you add 3 noughts to 20 million by presenting fictitious bank notes. And just a little bit there that he died suddenly, possibly by suicide. One other person, Trelawney. So I've always been interested in the names Cornwall in Jamaica and Trelawney, and I think that would be one of the questions was about mapping international links. I was looking in the archive at Exeter on the Gale family and their sugar distilleries in Jamaica, and anyway, so the places are called Cornwall, and Trelawney is one of the other parishes. So just to say that Edward Trelawney was the governor of Jamaica from 1738 to 1752. The Trelawney parish in the county of Cornwall, Jamaica, was heavily defined as a sugar-based slave economy. And there is also the incredible history of the Trelawney town Maroons. So Maroons is the term given to escaped slaves who then often rebelled against slave masters. And the Trelawney town Maroons are quite notorious because they played a significant role in the Second Maroon War. So yeah, just a little bit about Trelawney. Sat in the House of Commons, represented West Loo and East Loo. So he's also described as an abolitionist, but the defense he gives of the economy kind of takes away from that staunch kind of liberationist philosophy. And maybe just one more, Rose Price. This is so here I suppose this is where a question mark. Rose Price inherited slave plantations from Jamaica, in Jamaica from his father, and they included Worthy Estate. So Worthy Estate is in Jamaica, and I can't say that Africans lived at Trengwainton House and Pleasure Garden, but I feel that it's possible that they were there. So that idea of the a black present, sometimes I think you do have to, maybe sometimes you have to sort of sense something, maybe. So Rose Price did have 2 children by his slave Lizette. She was 13. And then he later sent his children to England. So it is possible that they specifically arrived, or that they were in Cornwall, but I haven't been able to prove that yet. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen and come back to you. And Abby, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is just going back to the person Equiano, and I thought I'd just sort of say why I think he's so relevant to, you know, to Cornwall. He was sold as a slave to a Royal Navy captain called Pascal for about £40 in 1754. And he arrived in Falmouth as Pascal's slave in December. And they had arrived in Cornwall via Canada and later together crossed the Atlantic several times. I would argue that Equiano's text is the most complete description of slavery and a slave ship by a slave, and that's what makes it so unique. He also his text, he published it himself, so he was not just the author, he was the publisher, and he made a lot of money from it, enough to give his daughter about £80, which would be about 8,000 now. It was Equiano who contacted Thomas Clarkson about the Zong massacre. So Thomas Clarkson is often heralded as an abolitionist, but actually it was Equiano who really told him the story about what happened on the Zong. The Zong massacre was an insurance claim in relation to the Zong ship, on which the captain had miscalculated the amount of food and water that was needed to transport slaves, and so decided to throw them overboard and then claim compensation in court. If we could just go to the next slide, Abby, just for a moment. Okay, so thank you. The Zong was the focus of Turner's painting, The Slave Ship, but Turner was painting it 50 years after Equiano's text, after his narrative. So if we could just go back to the other one, please. Yeah, so just looking at point number 6, Equiano was commissioned to take a deportation of Africans out of the UK to Sierra Leone. So this was like, you know, trying to get rid of blacks from the UK. But Equiano decided that the trip was insufficiently resourced and complained to the government. And finally, he married a Welsh woman and left that amount for his daughter in his will. Next slide, please, or 2 slides. Yeah, lovely. So I just thought to think about the present. This is a quote from Equiano's text, published in London in 1789, and I'll just read it so that you get a sense of his sense of self, really. All my alarms began to subside when we got sight of land, so he's on a slave ship. And at last the ship arrived at Falmouth after a passage of 13 weeks. Every heart on board seemed gladdened on our reaching the shore, and none more than mine. The captain immediately went on shore and sent on board some fresh provisions, which we wanted very much. We made good use of them, and our famine was soon turned into feasting, almost without ending. It was about the beginning of the spring 1757 when I arrived in England, and I was near 12 years of age at that time. So we've got Equiano talking about being a young boy, 12 years old, and being in Falmouth. Next slide, please, Abby. Okay, I've also given this quote, which he's described, but he's still in Falmouth. I was very much struck with the buildings and the pavement of the streets in Falmouth, and indeed any object I saw filled me with new surprise. One morning when I got upon deck, I saw it covered all over with the snow that fell overnight. As I had never seen anything of the kind before, I thought it was salt. So I immediately ran down to the mate and desired him as well as I could to come and see how somebody in the night had thrown salt all over the deck. I took up a handful of it, which I found very cold indeed, and when I brought it to him, he desired me to taste it. I did so, and I was surprised beyond measure. I then asked him what it was. He told me it was snow, but I could not in any wise understand him. I then asked him the use of it and who made it. He told me a great man in the heavens called God. But here again, I was to all intents and purposes at a loss to understand him. And I pointed this bit out not just because of the Falmouth and this idea of snow, but also the reference to the great man in the heavens, because Equiano throughout his text does talk about not understanding. And I think that he is almost resisting some of the kind of Christian ideas of a one God. Is it, he's an intelligent man when he's writing this, and I think it's subtle critique of Christianity that condones slavery. Next slide, please. Yeah, I should also say that Methodism was very important for anti-slavery, and you just have to think Cornwall and Methodism to kind of get those links. This is him talking about white people, which is unusual, I think, to have a Black person saying white people. I was astonished at the wisdom of the white people in all things I saw, but was amazed at their not sacrificing or making any offerings or eating with unwashed hands and touching the dead. I likewise could not help remarking the particular slenderness of their women, which I did not at first like, and I thought that they were not so modest and shamefaced as the African women. So I think this is, again, it's a clear critique. They're eating with unwashed, white people are eating with unwashed hands and not making sacrifices to their ancestors, but also this reference to the women being a bit too skinny. He's not so, and they're not very modest. So I thought that's giving a picture possibly of women in Falmouth at the time. Next slide, please. Equiano's text is, I think, amazing because it talks about the practice of reading, and it's in Falmouth that this phrase talking books comes up, I think, for so he's still in Falmouth, and he says, I had often seen my master and Dick, who's I think the ship's mate, employed in reading, and I had a great curiosity to talk to the books as I thought they did, and so to learn how all things had a beginning. For that purpose, I have often taken up a book, and I have talked to it and put my ears to it, and when alone, in hopes it would answer me. And I have been very much concerned when I found it remained silent. So I think this is an absolutely fantastic moment where Equiano is talking about reading, not understanding what a book is. He also talks about a clock, not understanding what that is. But that idea that it's talking and he can't hear it, he hasn't understood, he hasn't uncoded the secrets of what white Western society. And also a little bit here about him making a friend. Number 2, my master lodged at the house of a gentleman in Falmouth who had a fine little daughter about 6 or 7 years old. And she grew prodigiously fond of me, insomuch that we used to eat together and had servants to wait on us. After I had been here a few days, I was sent on board the ship, but the child, the daughter, cried so much after me that nothing could pacify her until I was sent for again. It is ludicrous enough that I began to fear I should be betrothed to this young lady. So that's another kind of misunderstanding that he thinks the relationship is one of possible marriage just because she's so concerned about him. And the young child, of course, you know, arranged marriages would have happened at a very young age. Thank you, AB. Next slide. Okay, so I thought just to end, I would talk a little bit about how I responded or tried to respond creatively to the archives. So Maeve and the 3,000 Black GIs was a response to well, a few things, but there's an exhibition about GI, Black American GIs in Cornwall. And there's a court case which I read, and also it's this photograph which I think really brings people a lot. You know, they are people with dreams and stories and fantasies. So I took one of them from the photo and I created a character, and I decided that I wanted to talk about interracial relations. So Maeve is Cornish and she does work in Plymouth. I should say this is a play, but it uses poetry as well. And she gets involved, she has a relationship. So that's how the story works. And I've tried to keep Cornwall in it as much as I can. So that's been showcased. I haven't had a full production. And then I write a lot of poetry, and I thought that this might be this. I wrote this a couple of weeks ago. It's called Arrival Cornwall, and it's a way of thinking about some of these ideas, and also being a bit autobiographical. So I've lived in Cornwall 25 years. So the poem has got 3 parts to it. Have we got time, AB, for me to read it? I'm not sure. I've lost a bit of...
We've got about 6 minutes left of like until 8:30, but I think because you've said it, I think people might just be curious to hear it now anyway. I know I am, so if people need to leave, please, I don't want to
please
keep
leave.
you, so,
Don't,
but yeah, I'm really curious to hear it.
Okay, so I think I've made 3 slides. Yeah, so it's in 3 parts. So if I go like that, then would you move on, AB? So could you move on to the next slide? Yeah. Oh, can't see it now. So this is part 1, Arrival Cornwall. I cross the river and arrive, a brown child of the city, of polished shoes, busy streets and black taxis, now an adult walking cautiously, trespassing in this land, tiptoeing through secret groves of ancient trees, elegant Monterey pine and red cedars of Lebanon, and broken signs sighing, do not pass. I imagine a furious earl pointing an inherited shotgun at me. Tumbled stone of a ruined hut tells of a bygone age. An empty swing hangs from a tree ominously. A thought flutters. Is this place real? Is this what they mean when they say you have strayed from the path? Without announcement, the woods are gone, and an ocean rolls before me, and 6 white egrets skim its surface silently. Not looking. I am not looking for my ancestors, but when I swim alone in open water, I am with them. When I swim alone, I break the ocean's skin, a delicate membrane that separates and binds me to them and the water that brought us. 40 miles from Land's End, my ancestors sleep in the swollen belly of another wrecked slave trading ship. Some not born yet, dreaming of cowrie shells and masks of ivory, their skulls resting on tusks, hopes sinking, dissolving. But young Philip Scipio, you survived, and you made it alive to Warrington in Launceston. Who else were you travelling with? Equiano, what was it like to touch snow and talk to a book for the first time in Falmouth? Could you imagine that we would read your words 250 years later? Emily, when you arrived, did you already play the kora? Is that why your owners would not give you your freedom? Were you kidnapped by Sapello on that dreadful night in Lisbon? Did you imagine that you would stay here or play the violin from your grave with such perfection? Lewis Assassa's mother sleepwalks from the Pearl, sunk in St. Ives water, perhaps mistaking the dazzling beaches at St. John's River, Liberia. Did you know that your 13-year-old son would make it to London? Oh, you of little trace, except a few printed words and broken shapes on shifting sand. A clay pipe from Virginia, stolen from a master. Amongst the sigh and the pleas and the ebb-tide tears of the sea, we hear your voices. Gunna, 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 coulda, coulda, coulda. I'm looking for my lost children. I am trying to. When this is all done, I will not. I will run. Thank you.
That was amazing, Helen. Thank you. Really, really moving and emotional. Yeah. And as Helen says, beautiful. I'm aware that it's 8:30. If people need to go, feel free to go. But if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to stay and ask. If that's also all right with Helen and Chloe. So yeah, go for it if you've got any questions or comments. Yeah, Helen, go for it.
Do you know, this has been so poignant. That poem, Helen, absolutely blew me away. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It was absolutely phenomenal what both you and Chloe have shared, and I'm doing we're wrapping up our lottery funding, and I was doing a part on Equiano, and I put it aside, but I'd love to talk to you about reimagining that and getting it completed. So thank you. You've been an inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love that. Amazing. Maria or Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helen. That was really interesting. I love the information on the maps, and would love to get access to them. I took a picture of the screen when you said there was a link there, so I hope that I can do it through that. And
yeah, I could.
Sorry, carry on.
I can put it in the chat. I forgot to do that.
I put it in the chat a little bit earlier, so you might need to
Okay.
scroll through. But I'm you know me, I'm going to send a feedback form round for everybody, so I'll include the link in that email.
Thank you very much. I also like the idea of responding creatively to the archives and to this information, because there are lots of different ways of keeping history alive, and this is just one of them. And it also is a way of recording how those people so long ago have affected us and continue to affect us now. And I think that's really important. So thanks very much. I enjoyed the poem a lot. Can we find your work anywhere?
Yeah, so I've published a book of poems called 1562, which is the date from. I can give you a copy. I got an Arts Council funding, and I printed some, so I can just send you some copies. I perform. Well, I read poems and sometimes have them recorded. So I've got some of them on a website, so I can send you a link. And I absolutely agree with the point about responding creatively, because I think when I was listening to Chloe, oh my goodness, I couldn't take enough notes. And perhaps someone who you mentioned, Chloe, Maria Edwards, the stay maker, the corset maker. She's she just came alive when you were talking about her. So it's just, she's a real person, but also you can, I think, as an artist, a writer, you have creative license to blend as well. So in a way, sometimes not having as much information can be helpful creatively. Well, sometimes when people are very famous and there's lots of information, you feel like you need to follow it. It becomes biography. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Maria, for your comment.
Of Equiano. I don't know if this book is still in print or if you can even see it. I might have to do hang on, let me take this off.
Who's the editor?
It's edited by Paul Edwards. It's called Equiano Travels. It's a very good book.
So Paul Edwards should have a prize. I don't think he's with us anymore, but he wrote in the 80s a book called Staying Power. And Staying Power.
Actually, that was Peter Fryer.
Oh yeah, so Peter Edwards is Edinburgh University. Yeah. But I haven't got that copy. But yeah, have you read it?
Staying Power, yes. It was one of the first books that I read about Black history, and yeah, it's here somewhere. It's a great read, really very, very interesting, and
when I first read it. So I'm a Londoner. I was born in Paddington Hospital, and when I read it, when I was doing my PhD, I had no idea where Falmouth was. So it's only looking at it recently that it was like, oh, Falmouth, because these names, they don't really register. That they're places, but I had no idea that it was by the sea, or as Chloe was pointing out, the importance of the packet ships where all the letters came. It's so so important. Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to go to Andrew, and that might just need to be our last question, because I'm just aware of the traitors. It's going to be on at 9, so.
It was just an observation, really. I see Mimi's here as well. Mimi, we were at a conference at Trellis today, and there was a very inspiring lady, I believe called Charity Gladstone, and she was talking about one of her heroes, John Harris, who was a poet, a Cornish poet. It was very not scared to put his neck above the parapet or his head above the parapet about his views against slavery, and I think that view was shared by a lot of the wider Cornish community. I think that I think a lot of Cornish people refuse to use sugar in their drinks because of the links with slavery and the plantations and sugarcane. But I've there was a brilliant poet that he wrote. I'll post a link in the chat about. It's called the end of slavery. So I think it's just worth observing that the Cornish community even back then were opposed to it. And made their feelings known. But yeah, just an observation today. And I did a little bit of research when I got home. It was an interesting story. But yeah, that's it really from me.
I would contest that everyone in Cornwall was anti it. So there was definitely another side to that story.
Yeah, I think it's we can do more work on that. I mean, as I said, the Methodists and the Quakers were really influential in terms of lobbying Parliament. Definitely. But I think that when you're looking at the do you know that the database called the Legacies of British Slavery? I can put a link to that. That gives you details of, as I said, compensation, and you can then link back to some of Cornwall, but also the colonies. And I do wonder whether the pasty is actually from Jamaica.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm gonna draw this to a close, but I want to say a massive thank you first of all to Chloe and Helen. Your work and research is absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad that it's hit all of our ears today, and hopefully we'll then go on and continue spreading the information. I'm also glad that there's an appetite for this as well. So obviously, like, if people are still interested, happy to do like series, or because obviously there's also so many other people that have done research on Black history in Cornwall too. So not to put pressure on you guys all the time, but to include everybody in kind of spreading their knowledge and research on that. And then also my second thanks is to everybody that has come along tonight. I am going to be sending around feedback forms, so please do fill it in. We can't function without feedback, so that'd be appreciated. But I will leave you all to your evenings. Enjoy the traitors if you are watching, and I'll see you all soon. But have a good evening. Thank you all.
Thank you for organising, and thank you, Chloe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That's just my cousin probably not paying attention. Samantha.
I'll leave you to a family affair.
Yeah, no, nice to see you. See you soon.
Thanks, Chloe. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for organising. Bye. Bye.
Of course.